Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for attending in person or online for those of you who have joined. My name is Dr. S.M. Rodriguez. I'm Assistant Professor of Gender, Rights, and Human Rights here at LSE in the Department of Gender Studies. And I have the honor and pleasure of being the chair for the event today, which is on open access in the commons, the many faces of scholar-led publishing. I'm going to do a few notes, just housekeeping notes, before introducing our speakers and hearing from this wonderful panel, and then having a time for questions from you all, as well as you all online. So to begin with the basic housekeeping, those of you used to LSE events will know what's coming. But for fire safety, in case of a fire, we do have an assembly point where we meet at Lincoln Inn Fields, which is outside of CKK and Cooper's. So directly out this way. Please, of course, take stairs in the event of a fire. With that being said. All right, from here, please put your mobile phones on silent to avoid disrupting the event. Thank you so much, speakers included. The event will be recorded, and we hope to share this recording afterward so that you know it is also being live streamed. So we are currently joined by some online guests. We'll begin with a roundtable kind of discussion, hearing from each speaker for roughly 5 minutes. The entire event is scheduled to last for an hour, and we do have some refreshments and snacks, as well as the room. The space will be available for about a half hour after the event for us to get to know each other as well. So as an introduction to the series itself, the LSE Open Research Working Group, or ORWG, is a group of researchers, academics, and professional services staff from across LSE, aiming at providing strategic direction for open research support at LSE, and to foster a culture of open, transparent, inclusive, and collaborative research. This is the first ORWG event for the term, and all of them are filmed and uploaded to the ORG website. Previous events can also be viewed there. The events cumulatively aim to inform researchers and bring together researchers and professionals from various backgrounds to discuss and explore matters related to open research. So open access has expanded audiences. It makes research available to more people than ever before. However, the present system, as you'll hear, there are some critiques to some of the models, right? The present system is marketized. There's commercial scholarly publishers, there's Gold OA, which includes payment of article processing charges. Obviously, this creates or deepens some inequalities within knowledge production. We see how the processing charges mean that those who are academics affiliated with under-resourced universities, academics from historically exploited countries, do not have equal access to publishing through the current models. With that being said, they also stretch library budgets in a time where higher education funding is struggling. And it financially incentivizes publishers to publish large quantities of poor quality research, or research that hasn't gone through adequate review processes. We also see, of course, the rise of predatory journals, and the modeling and this kind of acceptance of high fee based publishing models. So some possible solutions have been proposed as reorienting toward Diamond OA or scholar-led rather than publishing company-led models. This panel, this roundtable, will help us understand and really situate what do scholar-led models look like and what are their potentials and their drawbacks. And so I'm going to introduce the speakers, and I'll also plug that, part of my interest in this has been that I've served as an editorial member of a scholar-led open access journal called Wagadu, which is for transnational women in gender studies. So today, and in this order, we will hear from Dr. Sam Moore, who's scholarly communication specialist at University of Cambridge and the author of Publishing Beyond the Market, Open Access, Care, and the Commons. We'll also hear from Professor Caroline Edwards, Executive Director of the Open Library of the Humanities, Innovation, and Commercialization, and Professor of Contemporary Literature and Culture in School of Creative Arts, Culture, and Communication at Birkbeck, University of London. We will hear from Professor Mercedes Bunz, Professor of Digital Culture and Society at KCL Department of Digital Humanities, member of the Interdisciplinary Network for the Critical Humanities, Terra, Critica. And lastly, we will hear from Dr. Andrea Pia, Associate Professor at LSE Department of Anthropology, founding member of the scholar-led editorial cooperative Cooperate for Open. With that, thank you so much. And Sam, if you could start us off.
Yeah, sure. So I just published a book in September, which is about all of these topics. It is open access, so please go and download it and read it. And I guess I'll kind of set the scene a little bit. So what I do in the book is sort of chart the kind of open access movement over the last, say, 10 to 15 years, and looking in particular at the UK and what's happened. And the analysis starts in earnest at the Finch report, which is the sort of founding document of UK government approaches to open access. And one of the kind of the issues I pick up with that is that it's a very damaging document because it set in motion this idea that they wanted article processing charges to be the way in which open access is given to us, is that we give you a certain amount of money, you as an author will go and you'll be a kind of what's the term, you're taking your kind of your buying power to different places, and a good market will sort of function as a result. Now that's incredibly damaging because obviously what happened is that academics were spending someone else's money, they were spending the UK government's money, so of course that functioning market didn't arise. And so what did happen is that publishers globally, but also kind of as a result of the UK context, started to I guess want APCs, and they took as many APCs as they could. And so we have these business models now where people want, where publishers are trying to kind of acquire as many APCs as possible, and they're very incentivized to do that by publishing as much as possible and as quickly as possible without sort of human labor and with recourse to automation and those sorts of things. So kind of what SM was saying really. And so as a result, quality, it's not necessarily that quality is worse, it's just that they're not checking things in the way that they should be. Is that if you funnel things through a peer review process where you want as few human eyes as possible on it, then obviously things are going to get published that shouldn't be. And we're seeing that time and time and time again. And so that really was the sort of where I began with the book, that we have this weird system. Open access is a good thing. I think it's a really good thing. We want to give literature to people who can't access it for like a multitude of reasons. But what ended up happening was the marketization of it. So all of the same publishers who controlled it previously now control open access, which is obviously probably not what was intended. It's not a very good thing. And so kind of starting from that point, I then look at what you might call a counterpoint. And a counterpoint would be the three panelists with me, or the four people with me here, who run scholar-led journals. And they do so for a variety of reasons, and we will hear what those reasons are. But they're an interesting counterpoint because they are not doing it with recourse to commercial needs or marketization and those sorts of things. And they're doing it for experimentation, or it's an extension of their research, or they want better publishing cultures, or the publishing industry isn't giving them what they wanted. So all of these things. And so from looking at those presses, I was thinking, like, how can we even think about sustaining that ecosystem? It's a really good ecosystem. It's not something that's going to fix all of publishing, but it's something that is valuable in itself. So how do we support that? And so thinking about things like a term which I came up with my colleague Janneke Adema called scaling small, where we try to sort of knit these presses together somehow, where you can share resources and you say, we're actually going to look out for one another because this stuff's really difficult. We're having to retrain as publishers. We're having to do stuff on top of our jobs. So how can we kind of efficiently share this work out, share the expertise, share the resources, and just look out for one another. And so that kind of term of scaling small means you keep the diversity of these small presses, this ecosystem, at the same time as making it much more resilient and robust. And so that really, I mean, in a very quick nutshell, I'm not sure how long I have actually, but that is that really is the sort of the argument. What I'd like, I mean, the book itself really does present, I mean, it presents interview data, and so that's, if you're to read anything from the book, it'd be interesting to read that bit, because it's that people are doing this for such different reasons. I can't remember the title of the panel exactly, but it gestures towards that. It's the fact that that journals are we're not just looking at this homogenous lump of scholar-led publishers. They do things for a variety of reasons, and if you look outside the UK context, it becomes even more interesting and diverse. And so this stuff has been going on prior to the open access movement. I try to locate what we call kind of scholar-led experiments in the early 90s as the founding of this more alternative open access movement. And it's not just in the UK, obviously. It's Latin America has been incredibly important in this movement too. Particularly in the mid to late 90s, Silo was founded, and that's a government-funded diamond open access. Diamond meaning of something you don't have to pay to access or pay to publish into. There's no APCs. And so that's kind of what I try to do really. So chart it all, and then see how we might be able to sustain this stuff going forward, I guess. So I think I'll stop there and just let someone else talk. But yeah.
Thank you so much. Caroline?
Yeah, thank you. An honour to follow on from Sam. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So I was actually going to start in 2012 as well, and just give you a brief outline of how I came into open access publishing as an academic, and why that was such a pivotal moment. So in my life in 2012, I'd recently finished my PhD. I'd set up my first open access journal with my friend Martin Eve, and we were early careers researchers, so we were kind of excited about new digital technologies. I was very influenced by media and film studies and TV scholarship, who were using WordPress and building their own kind of DIY websites and producing online content and early video essays and things. And whilst we were setting that up and sort of figuring out how do you start the infrastructures that support a small scholar-led journal, the Finch report was published, as Sam just mentioned, and it was like this bomb was just dropped in the UK kind of scholarly communications landscape, and suddenly all of the large commercial publishers, the big five, Wiley, Taylor and Francis Informer Group, Sage, Elsevier, I've probably missed one out, they really pushed and lobbied their way towards these article processing charges. And as scholars who are from a humanities background, where there's just very little funding ever to be had, it was immediately apparent to us that this was never going to work. It worked possibly for some time for STEM colleagues who had research grants, who were able to allocate dedicated funds within those research grants to spend on the author pays model, where they had to pay to submit their work to the quote-unquote top journals. But it was never going to work for us. So we started the Open Library of Humanities as a kind of scrappy community project, one of these examples of experimentation. It took us 2 years with some seed funding to actually formalise into a publisher, which launched in 2015. And I think looking back now, over a decade later, what was really interesting in those first 2 years, we basically pulled together a series of committees and boards with all of the people we could think of who worked in this space, which is now quite a common way of starting these projects. And people sort of talk about getting governance fatigue, because the players in this landscape, it's quite a niche area of academic publishing, tend to get asked always to sit on the same committees and give their expertise for free in a voluntaristic way. But there was such a diversity and breadth of opinion on our boards about what we were going to be and how we would do it and how we would achieve it. And our starting point was thinking about PLOS, the Public Library of Science, and PLOS One, which was their mega journal. And so we thought we could come up with a mega journal for the humanities and social sciences. And just a few months into the discussions, it became really clear that that was never going to work for humanities scholars. And there are so many reasons I don't have time to go into. But primarily, this bond between scholars and journal title, which itself is a form of kind of social and cultural capital, which Sam writes about and my colleague Martin Eve has written about as well, was sort of somehow unbreakable. That if you wanted to try and start thinking about transitioning the entire landscape towards a non-commercial model, you couldn't just exclude people and you couldn't be super evangelical about it, that actually you had to try and move journals. And if you could find a way to show proof of concept that you move journals and with them you move the research communities that produce that journal, the entire system that underpins the research that goes into that journal, and all of the voluntaristic unpaid labour that, you know, makes that journal possible, that might be a route towards showing an example of an alternative. So we did that, and we built a library membership model, which at the time, despite what Sam mentioned about Latin America having done this for decades, we faced an enormous amount of criticism. It probably didn't help that we were early career researchers, so nobody knew who we were. We were just kind of junior lecturers. And everybody said, why would libraries pay for content that anybody can read on the internet for free? There's just no incentive for them to do that. And so it was, in pre-pandemic times, pre-Zoom times, it was literally boots on the ground. We have to go around library to library. My colleague Martin travelled the world. I mean, he went to as many places as possible in those 2 years to kind of press the case, person to person, face to face, for why libraries should support this. And they did. And we launched with nearly 100 libraries in 2015. And ever since that point, I think, I'm incredibly proud of the team at the Open Library of Humanities, one of whom my colleague Dr. Paula Clemente Vega is here with us today, who works incredibly hard. But I think in the UK, just proving that it was possible for libraries to be able to themselves put their money where their mouth was, that we had this serials crisis that had been going on for decades, and that actually there was something we could do about it. We could take agency back without sounding a bit Brexity. Like, it was possible to take back control in a small, kind of discreet, perhaps, way. So that was the beginning of the Open Library of Humanities. It wasn't called Diamond Open Access in those days. It was just APC free. And to this day, I think you referred to floating signifiers and Ernesto Leclau, which I loved, but the terminology, is contested and changes. Some folks would still call it platinum open access. Some people call it diamond. Whenever I speak or my colleagues at the OLH speak, we always say that diamond open access is not just that the readers don't pay and the authors don't pay, it is also a non-profit model that is community governed and scholar-led, and we really insist on that definition, which is also the definition adopted by the Plan S organisation in Europe. And what we learned, I guess, as we sort of fast forward from 2015 through to over the last 10 years, was that there's actually enormous academic appetite for this model. And I think that's something that I have to press this case again and again, particularly to academic audiences, that an enormous number of colleagues really do want to move away from commercial publishers. The levels of anger, now, particularly since we have AI, and particularly since these large commercial publishers have been signing these massive deals to sell all of their content to, Copilot and ChatGPT and whatever, which just exacerbates a problem that has existed. We all gave away our copyright. We signed copyright transfer agreements as authors. Lots of us didn't read those agreements carefully enough. We thought, well, that's a contract. I've got a contract. That's great. And because, we're desperate to publish in the right journals for our kind of career progression and, for getting on the academic job market and so on, we didn't really scrutinise those contracts. So these global corporate entities are within their rights to sell our content. We don't even own it. And I think the first step is to sort of, talk to your colleagues and make them aware that they don't own the copyright to their own materials. But yeah, so day in, day out now, I speak to editorial boards who are really furious with the situation. I would actually come back to Sam and say they are devaluing the quality and the content. so many editors that I speak to will talk about how the article acceptance rates, so the number of manuscripts that they accept for their journal, they're being forced by the commercial publishers to double and triple the number of articles that they accept. And that is precisely because of this business model where the publisher gains the revenue from the article processing charges, which is supposed to compensate them for lost subscriptions in the old system where it was a library subscription model. And then you get these kind of mixed models of, read and publish access to the back content and authors being able to publish. But it's highly inequitable. It means that any scholars who don't have a proper affiliation, who are precarious, which increasingly is, I mean, it's what, like 75% of academics now in this country are precarious, basically. So they wouldn't have access to APC funding. Scholars in the Global South obviously wouldn't have access either. So it really just perpetuates a model where the commercial publishers, are ripping all of us off, and they're extracting on an industrial scale profits higher than Amazon, Apple and Google. And that's probably the most shocking part of all of this, which when I do, talks and workshops with PhD students, none of them have ever heard of this. And if you take them through the globally most profitable companies, 2 or 3 of which are publishing companies doing academic publishing, no one in the room has ever heard of them. So it is astonishing just how much work we have to do if we want to advocate for moving away from a profit model. Just to sort of come back to my journey briefly, because I've gone off track. One of the ways that we made the Open Library of Humanities kind of sustainable longer term was that we built our own infrastructure, not just social, not just kind of financial in terms of the library membership and the governance, but also technical. So we built our own platform, which is an end-to-end manuscript submission system for peer review and all of the publishing and production workflows. We copyleft license to that, which we think is really important because we have to protect our open source technology as much as we have to protect our open access content, and we can perhaps come back to that in the discussion. And that's led to a much bigger project called the Open Journals Collective, which is an international infrastructure to support Diamond Open Access journals, which has just launched this month. OLH is one of several partners, including the LSE Press, which I'm delighted to say, and others. And we've got 284 journals in the sciences and the humanities. And I will happily answer more questions about that if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mercedes.
Hi. How could I best continue from that? So I'm running a press with colleagues that has been founded in about, I think, 2015 or something. We published about 67 books. It's called Maison Press, looks like this, and it publishes media, studies, philosophy of technology, theory, contemporary theory stuff. It's a scholarly led press. It is a bit unusual probably because we do author processing fees, and one reason why we're doing that is, first of all, it's located halfway in Germany. It's the outcome of a hybrid publishing lab that was running there for 3 years. That was sort of, and we developed that together with Gary Hall, who runs Open Humanities Press. And in Germany, absurdly enough, maybe because if you publish in German, you can never sell as much as if you publish in English. Author processing was or is the case for books before open access, so even before PDFs. So if you would be an academic, you were, first of all, you had to, if you want to have a PhD within a year, you have to publish the PhD, and usually you paid for that. So author processing fees was something that everyone was quite familiar with. And we explore and we do run other models, particularly the library route is super interesting, and we support that. We also use our author processing fees to cross-finance. So, for example, when we work together, we're just doing a book with scholars in Latin America, 21 keywords for the 21st century. It's a philosophy of technology project. And then we said, so it would normally cost, the book would normally cost €3,000. But, you know, if you can't find the money, no problem. We are using our author processing fees to cross-finance then these projects. And the approach that we have was probably, after all, open access presses, even scholarly presses, we all still live in capitalism. You know, the revolution has not been there yet. So it is a constraint within your work, and that influences how you work and what's going on. And you have to have money to run your server, to pay your designer, to pay the copy editor in the end to do those things. And for us, it was always more like create your own context, create your own ecology, and create also a context which you can control or are on top of, instead of, you know, outsourcing the reading of the copy editing to developing countries that with English speakers, which is what big science publishers are doing, where it's all like streamlined. And if you have a book that's being read, not one person reads the whole book, each chapter is read by someone different, and so on, so on. So we experienced these kind of situations. So we said, we want to work differently. Absurdly enough, I know Yannick was always like, oh yeah, let's experiment. And we're like, oh no, we have no time for experiments. Can we streamline this? Don't, please stop. You know, authors love to collaborate on Google Docs, which kills all your metadata that is on the Word documents. We're like, don't go on Google Docs, no. So to keep, because like we're really three working academics, we not do research about open access. We just run the press because I also love publishing. I published a techno music magazine before for 10 years, a monthly one in Berlin. So it's sort of things that we like to work with. But so it's quite interesting. The infrastructure point's really important. Also how publishers collaborate amongst each other. It's quite a friendly network and environment. If you're interested, I can welcome anyone to just ask questions there. I mean, we have been helped by Gary, and it's always, you know, you pass this on then to younger people. And we're sort of are also in a moment where we want to publish a bit more. And one person should live from it. That's our dream, or at least halfway. So we have a younger scholar who lives with us, and her PhD is about to finish. And so she starts to, has time to edit stuff more properly that she's interested in and work more and see how that works. Another thing which we haven't discussed, but I think which we might come or should come back in the discussion, what happens with AI, you know? Because I think we have a split in our own press, and I very briefly just say that I'm quite pragmatic about it. I'm quite, it's a tool, you know, in my own text. I don't say, can you correct it for me? And I copy paste the text. I say, can give me a list of my spelling mistakes. And then I correct them by hand because I'm control freak, so I want control of my text. But it is quite helpful. And I worked just with Latin American scholars who collectively wrote an introduction. Their own texts were all cleaned, but apparently they were a bit like, when they were collectively, they were afraid of, you know, going too close to another person's expression and didn't want to interfere. And they had quite long, Spanish functions differently as a language. They had quite long-winded sentences. English quite Hemingway small, even in science publishing. And so I said, it doesn't work. And I said, before I said to themselves, like, you can use something and like check it. So I ran it through ChatGPT and track changed it and said, like, check every single thing out. But this is more, it sounds more English, but I know it changes the meaning at some points, and it makes it at some points flat. So check every moment. But, you know, and this way, even if, then they found out that they can find a copy editor anyhow. So, but we didn't know that before. So it was actually quite helpful for them to, you know, get somewhere. So it can also be a helpful tool exactly when, you know, when you collaborate closely and watch the language and care for the language,
you can use the tool even if you care for the language, if it remains a tool and not becomes the author. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mercedes. Andrea.
This is really interesting, and I think maybe we can start from LLMs, large language models, and open access, and I think it's a good window into the ambivalences of working on these initiatives. I think pages needs to be written about how open access enabled the development of LLM to a serious extent.
Yes,
and now
absolutely.
we didn't have control over that, despite the fact that all of us are
Yeah.
control freak, but we didn't have control over that. And now using those models it actually add values to these proprietary technologies, because they then harvest these fine tunement that you do to make them better. And I don't have a position on this. Why I'm editing a journal that is called the Made in China Journal that now is really big. We have 200,000 independent readers of the journal, so it's grew so much that it's actually becoming it's having an afterlife of its own that we didn't really predict. And we are now slowly getting to realization that we need assistance of some kind, and we have this really kind of board where we all disagree, and then no conclusion is reached, and there's just a waste of labor, and we realize, oh God, when is going to be the next board where we can make any decision at all? I think so that I come to the open access and scholar-led publishing as practitioner. So I was as a student, I was editing and working on these basically was a trade union journal on labor and labor rights, and I'm a Chinese scholar of China, and so we were looking back in the days and how Chinese labor was basically shaping ILO regulations everywhere. And this was all open access, was all done for free, and it was then our boards, were trade union boards, were discussing what these findings about Chinese labor, how they should kind of inform public discussion about work exploitation, for instance. I'm from Italy, and so that is quite an ecology, these kind of things. It was natural for a lot of us in universities to think that ways, but then eventually we realized that there was very little discussion of China anywhere, and so we started producing this journal that is also an online platform. Now we have NGO that we use to collect donation to produce the journal, and I will get back to that model. I don't think actually that is a good model at all, but we don't know what to do at this stage. And so basically the journal became for us something that we were PhD students. We would do it, kind of part time. We would do translations. We thought that it was kind of really a labor of love, kind of, motivation behind your scholarly activity. And also we realized that there are lots of, scholars in China that cannot really publish what they want to publish because of how the ecosystem is controlled, right? So we would be contacted by people that saw as a venue that could extend their reach without compromising the ethics. And so that, we saw value in that. So eventually we got a Marie Curie grant. So we started off with the ERC money, and so we put some money for the journal there. And then eventually we used LSE money, so my staff research fund, to put into that. And the cost of it is really minimal now that I think of the economics. I mean, to produce a made in China journal issue, which is roughly 400 pages, it costs us less than £5,000, and this money go into, we employ one individual with the NGO who does that all the time, plus another job, of course. And then there is graphic designers that do the covers. We have editors that we spend money on to avoid using too much ChatGPT. And if you think about your Nature article costing you $15,000 for 3 pages, so that's the scale at which the extraction happens, and the economics are just flabbergasting, and I don't know how they work. It would be nice to be looking into the actual business model. So we started off like that, and we kept on relying on this kind of small little grants, and eventually, because we enrolled more people, we enrolled basically a lot of free labor, and so a lot of other people wanted to donate labor, so we'd kind of splinter into a second journal that is about global China. Then eventually we started doing documentaries, because the person who is the editor is also actually someone who works for TV, and so we became big enough that we had reason to pitch for money to donors, but we quickly realized, so I want to go back to this thing that Sam mentioned, the fact that, you know, there was a moment, I guess, in the open access community in the UK where cooperation between journals became kind of the holy grail, and this kind of, you know, kind of cooperate for access was kind of existing in this moment, and it exists still, is still kind of a ghostly institution haunting us, but the reality is that there is kind of life cycles to open access work, in the sense that when you just got funding, you immediately start off thinking about, okay, this is a good moment, how we can build on top of that, and then maybe build mutuality, solidarity, cooperation. And then, for instance, we had all these meetings with cultural anthropology. We had this meeting with the Open Encyclopedia of Anthropology, which is a great project. And we were all enthusiastic in sharing a platform. We shared this platform for easing the workflow and all of that. And the first few months seemed very promising. And then as we approached the deadline of the funding, we all enter in panic mode, and then cooperation is immediately scaled back. And we all go into kind of individual paranoid mode where it's gonna be, you know, the next pot of money is gonna come from. And so we are now sadly relying, I say so because we are really kind of conflicted with it, by it, because we still have this kind of probably moral drive of allowing Chinese scholars to publish independently. We need to rely on American money. And this is creating a lot of tension among us and among, you know, the people who submit, who feel that maybe China is a good place, and now they realize that because the funding model needs to be declared in this kind of Creative Commons endeavor, they are not willing to compromise anymore. So at the beginning we had this Global Knowledge Initiative, which was Biden administration funded, again, not really clear what they do. They came to a panel that he gave at the ASA, so the American Association of Asian Studies, and they're like, oh, we produced a crowdsourced map of Chinese investments abroad. They liked the project, and then all of a sudden they email us with saying, you know, we can give you $300,000 if you want. And all that felt like a kind of really kind of life-saving thing, and so we got those money, and so we can pay and produce and scale up. And then this money are now, you know, there are some things that they like us to do, some things that they like us to do less, of course. And now, you know, there is less work on this journal, more work on the platform. And we're already approaching another deadline, so we are now pitching to Open Society, which is technically the only funding body that exists that would be willing to finance something like us, that is at the scale that we have, and it can cover for 5 years or so. But then, of course, Open Society is pariah in China. Basically, you know, Soros said that Xi Jinping, so the president of the People's Republic of China, is the biggest threat to an open society. And so if you receive money from them and you declare that you receive money from them, this cuts immediately as an effect on your readership, immediately as an effect on the people who can submit to you and feel free to submit to you. So it's really kind of a devil's bargain, and we don't know what we are doing now. We know that, you know, so these are, what is it? These are the ills of open access in a way, but that you're constantly figuring out how to survive and stick to your ethical principles in a system that undermines, erodes those principles every single minute. I also come from anthropology, which is a place where there is a lot of issues with open access because it's a small discipline. With few scholars, a small readership, and there is not so much, you know, return on investments for big corporations, so the profit margin is small, and that created over the years, you know, this kind of dysfunctional open access that was for free, so at the point of production, at the point of access, but relied on the exploitation of labor. So PhD students working for the journal and their career prospects being linked to the work that they would do on the journal. Now this journal is called How, now is relying on AI. I saw that, yeah. Is relying on AI to translate book of anthropology in languages other than English, and then sell them at a profit. So that, and they make an argument that this would, you know, make it immediately, you know, possible for them to produce the next journal that is, you know, kind of in English. So all these kind of ethical kind of lines that needs to be crossed are the bread and butter of this business, and in these events like this, I think they're really useful to get a sense of how people would, you know, would they do the job that we do, and what would they choose to do. So it's very useful to share knowledge and insights about this as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for incredible talks, and I think, really great jumping off points. I wanted to turn over to the Q&A to see whether or not we could pick up any of these marvelous threads, and if not, I do have a question, but let's see first. Do we have any online that we wanted to share?
Okay, question for Caroline from an anonymous user. Would like to know more about the source for the claim that commercial publishers are extracting on an industrial scale profits higher than Amazon, Apple and Google. What data is this based on? Is it just the journals market or books as well?
So we actually have a page about this on our Open Library of Humanities website. I'm happy to share the link with the organisers. But we have a page about the open access movement, and there are hyperlink sources for that reference, one of which was a Guardian article that came out some years ago. But I mean, there are plenty that I can share if you want to look around. I think just to take the broader point though, I think what was really interesting, I was preparing a talk, when would it have been, kind of early last year, and I looked up the investment organisation Hargreaves Lansdown. So this is now the UK's largest private investment company, I guess, for anyone who wants to kind of invest in their stocks and shares. And they had singled out Elsevier as one of the most profitable forms of shares that you could buy. And it occurred to me that, the reason that it's so profitable is because it has purchased all of this content, and Elsevier's business model these days is much more interested in kind of data surveillance and integration of data into various different technologies than it is of academic publishing. And anybody who's Dutch will tell you that that particular organisation itself used to sell like magazines that you would find in the hairdresser in the 1980s. So it was not taken seriously. It was just a commercial company like the Murdoch Empire. So without going down a rabbit hole there, and also do read the introduction to Sam's book, who references Robert Maxwell and Pergamon Press, which is a whole other very interesting context worth raising here. There are a lot of sources online. Thank you for the question.
Can I add up one point to what Caroline just said? Some of this information is obtained through Freedom of Information request. And so when you get to find how much money in total the LSE the UK Library Consortium invest in those corporations, those data you need to access through that particular act, and it is in the millions of pounds, of course. And so that tells you how much money there is in the system and how much of it is being siphoned away from big publisher.
Any questions from inside of the room?
I have. Oh yes. This is helpful. Yes. So my question is going back to the issue of prestige in terms of publishing in prestigious journals being important for early career scholars to kind of advance their careers. As far as I'm aware, there aren't a whole lot of really prestigious kind of journals who have kind of left the the kind of commercial model and moved towards a scholar-led approach. I just wondered kind of what your thoughts were on how, I guess, to promote scholar-led ways of acting in those more prestigious journals, I guess.
I can take that one, I guess. So, I think prestige is a very slippery concept, and it's really difficult to, particularly in humanities and social sciences, where we don't have the impact factor that we can just go, we want the highest impact factor, let's just publish there. And so then you see journals, there's a press, Open Humanities Press, which is really important publisher of critical theory books, run by Gary Hall that Mercedes mentioned, and they published. The editorial board has got really big names from critical theory. They published everyone who's sort of working at the moment in this kind of field, but they're not considered prestigious, and I don't know why. And there's this kind of weird, and so when we talk about prestige, there's this sort of, I think it's sort of, it's just a very hard thing to nail down what that means. And so in some ways I wish that we were a bit more like the sciences, where we could just say, like, yes, that's a higher journal than this one, because otherwise, like, early career researchers have no idea how to kind of navigate that space, I think. But I mean, I guess I mean, people's response to that is often, we should get rid of journals because the idea of prestige itself is really bad. Now, I think that's the wrong approach. I think, like, if you look instead at journals as knowledge creating communities, then it doesn't necessarily have to be a sort of an exclusionary thing. It's just that this community has the politics that I share, or it has the broad subject matter that I'm interested in, all those sorts of things. And so I think that so I guess turning your question on head, I'm probably less interested in making those journals prestigious, but maybe just collapsing what prestigious means a little bit more, and just saying that actually it's okay to have journals that are communities, and you want to associate with those communities, and that's really cool, I think, because that's how we make sense of knowledge. But we don't want to be chasing the kind of the big presses for the sake of it, I think. But it's a very tricky question to actually how you get adoption of journals, and you probably shouldn't be doing it through prestigious models, I think, in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I share Sam's sentiment in terms of prestige being extremely problematic. Sorry, we're getting some feedback.
It might be this one.
My voice is just too loud.
Yeah.
I was raised on a farm. I can shout across fields. However, I'm also very pragmatic. As Mercedes said, we do live within capitalism, and as much as I wish we didn't, and I support anti-capitalism, we've got to figure out how we get, from A to B. So just to come back to Tom's question, I don't think that's actually true. There are quite a lot of quote-unquote prestigious journals. I'm just looking at the Retraction Watch list of mass editorial resignations. It's called the Mass Resignations List. Organisers, please feel free to share a link with followers online. But there are some really kind of big name journals there that have flipped from Elsevier, from Wiley. To give you one example, Neuroimage, which left Elsevier in 2023. I mean, that's a major journal that made international headline news in academic circles, and eventually ended up with MIT Press, I believe. So what we focused on at the Open Library of Humanities is, finding I think there's a sort of sweet spot in some ways with you need an editorial board who have the seniority and the quote-unquote prestige, right, who they have sort of less to lose in terms of their careers. Their careers are established. They're not, they have the luxury of being able to kind of resist that commercial system. And persuading them to kind of leave the commercial publisher, which in some cases is really hard. I get called into editorial boards, I get called into senior levels of governance that sit above the journal editorial board, and I have to really answer for the open access non-profit movement, and they grill me in those meetings. In other cases, they are desperate to talk to me and they're more than happy to leave. But when you get those journals, and in our case with a lot of journals, they don't own their own IP, intellectual property, for want of a better word. They don't own the title, the branding, they don't own the fonts, they don't own the name. You then basically have to set up a kind of alternative journal with a similar name, and you have to persuade everybody, like, this is where the real journal is living, and we're going to boycott what we call the zombie journal. You can look up what zombie journal is on our glossary of terms on the Open Library of Humanities website, and we had a whole Halloween campaign about it just to draw attention to this fact. So I do think we have enough examples. That Retractions Watch list, which is kept up to date, has been tracking these kinds of editorial moves away from commercial publishers over the last decade. We have enough examples to prove that it is possible, and it has been happening. But, as Sam says, we should also push back against prestige wherever possible. I just think it's sometimes a useful tool in our movement.
Can I add the usual story that I that I refer to when speaking to the question of how difficult it is to leave the standard model? So Cambridge University Press famously published the China Quarterly, which is the biggest journal about China. The China Quarterly entered few years ago in an agreement with the Chinese government that it would be allowed to have access to the Chinese market, which is very profitable, if they retracted some of the articles published in previous issues of the journal. Cambridge University Press said yes. They didn't disclose that they did so. They were kind of basically harassed by open access activists until they were forced to say so. They renegotiated the agreement, apologized with everyone. No one really left the editorial board. No one felt that this was a sign of a system gone wrong. I don't know what the situation is. I don't know how much politics exists there. And of course, the China Quarterly is, of course, kind of a public shaping, policy shaping journal, and so there are vested interest into it. But that's the degree. The journal published by Springer Link about China, they actually, when they were discovered having foreclosed access to critical material about the Chinese government on some of their publications, they actually made an argument in favor of the economics of it. This is the only system whereby we can still inject some of our scholarship into China, so that's good, and it's worth the ethical compromise that you make there. So it's really tough, I guess. And then in smaller, Antipode is a big journal in geography that was flipped. The Journal of Political Ecology is the third journal in the subfield that has always been open access, and it's basically run by two person. It has been run by two person for 30 years now. So there are also big journals in the kind of humanities, social sciences as well. It's just that it's very difficult. And one element of this is radicalizing the boards. So meeting them and actually try to make the case that flipping the journal is best for the scholarship, for the readership, and for the ecosystem as a whole.
I wanted to ask a question that I think actually piggybacks from the academic standpoint, considering that our, career livelihoods rely on the journals that we publish in, and yet we are the reviewers, we're the editors, we do all of the labor unpaid for these journals. And then we get, and we're promotions committees and whatnot. I'm wondering if there's successful kind of cases of resistance from the academic kind of standpoint in, to legitimize kind of open access or scholar-led specifically publishers, at the journal level, because I know that, there's significant kind of pushback at institutions like this where they are looking at impact factor and they are looking specifically at, the major, corporate publishers. I guess I'm wondering, what does resistance look like on the academic level?
I think that also depends very much from which discipline you're in, because the publishing culture is actually really very, very, different. I mean, by now we are talking about computer scientists. Anyone who publishes about AI wants to publish on archive, and this is open access, and often not even, like a little bit peer reviewed, but it is somewhat peer reviewed. Actually, I had a text with colleagues that was turned down, so I didn't confirm it. So there is, but it is really very, very difficult. And I think there are particular disciplines where the classic, peer review ranking is really very high, and then in the humanities, without the digital, monographs count, and now try to find the time to write a monograph. Good luck. But yeah, so I think that it really depends, and we could make an argument, but yeah, it's sort of that, whenever I work on Maison Press, I feel like I'm stealing from my real job, but actually the fact is actually not, I'm supposed to do all these things, and it's not really factored in. It has this weird of gray zone, which is also the work is sort of not properly seated anywhere, and that's a bit problematic. I think most yeah.
Speaking from again, I guess the discipline matters a lot, and I work in a small discipline where, in fact, people tend to be very sympathetic. Anthropology, people tend to be sympathetic with the effort. I think, though, that there is kind of for the people who are not involved in production of journals, there is no really the ability to understand how much work is it, and sometimes there is also kind of a scoffing attitude towards the reason why you're doing that, given the context you are in and how cutthroat it may be. And I was told that for my, in my kind of, let's say, tenure committee, the fact that I do work on this journal was taken into account. And of course, these are public meetings, so I don't know the extent to which this is kind of truthful, but I believe my colleagues, and I think that's there are places in which these things are considered, or they are used to explain gaps in your CV. This kind of things, they are used as kind of again, managerial metrics for your success, nonetheless, right? So I guess the one big problem in the open access space is how adjacent we are to the capitalist ecosystem, and how easy it is to capture us, right? So if it then becomes another thing that you do for the advancement of your career, this is already something that is eroding the type of effort, the spirit, right? This has not to do really with your individual advancement. It has to do with changing how university works, changing how people have access to knowledge, no? So it's actually, kind of part of open science as a political project. And so I would say it's, you need to be aware, because even if you get recognition may be a Trojan horse sometimes, right? And then, then maybe you receive offer for the journal to be taken, or, for some people to be put on the board. I've heard of cases like this. So you need to be vigilant.
Can I just add a quick point? The Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment, COARA, is an international organisation that's been founded precisely to try and address this question of how this kind of uncompensated labour should be accommodated in workload allocations at universities, and should be taken into consideration on tenure and promotion committees and things like that. I don't know very much about it, but it needs to be mentioned, I think.
Yeah, I was going to mention them as well, actually. And there's also DORA, which is another one about not valuing journal metrics for hiring purposes. And I always find these things just slightly kind of wanting somehow, because they never really address the real problem, which is sort of the marketisation of higher education in the UK, and the sort of shrinking of funding in our disciplines. And they say, actually, we can just arrange hiring purposes in this fair way, but they don't really say how. And then there's this huge elephant in the room saying, like, you're getting like 500 applicants to one assistant professor job or something like that. It's like, how do you fare your way out of that? You just can't. And so there isn't really a good solution to any of that, which is a problem. But ultimately, I think we do have to recognise that it is really a labour issue, and it's something around, like, if we are doing this additional work on top of our jobs, it would be nice to recognise that as much as possible. I actually published an article a few years ago about this, where we argue for, I think we argue for 1 day a week of unstructured autonomous time to work on publishing, which in a million years is never going to happen. But we thought, actually, we want to at least make this case, because we're showing like what could be if we had a better system, I suppose. But yeah, so yeah, no good answers. But I just wish it was slightly more political. I wish that it wasn't so top down. Even, I mean, Carrara, I think, is better than Dora in that it's more sort of community led, but it lacks that kind of teeth, I think. So yeah.
Okay, so I think that we have to come to an end now. Those of us who are in the space, we still have the space for a little bit. You're welcome to speak to any of the panelists who have time to stick around as well. I want to thank you all for joining us, and those of you who are online for joining us as well. And thank you so much, for your expertise, your brilliant, insightful commentary. I appreciate that. I want to just let you know, in terms of the open research community, that you can sign up for the newsletter or follow Open Research on LinkedIn. And then also that there is another event coming up on the 11th of February. So it's called Compromising Usability for Interoperability, the Benefits and Challenges of Open Source Software in Research. And it will be chaired by Dr. Jonathan Cardoso Silva, who's here at LSE Data Science Institute, with 3 panelists. And also, then if you have any topics that you would like to suggest, please do, I think, email Tom, with any topics that you may want to see future events cover. Thank you again for attending and for your comments.
Thanks.